All right, so we're back, and today we're diving deep into some pretty choppy waters. You sent in a whole stack of stuff on Tether.
Oh, yeah.
And, well, let's just say things aren't looking too stable for this stablecoin giant. We've got potential DOJ investigations swirling around, whispers of banking troubles, and even some major exchanges starting to get a little skittish.
Mm-hmm.
So, big question here is, are Tether's days numbered? Or is this just another bump in the road for the biggest stablecoin out there?
Yeah, what's interesting is the Tether's kind of always operated in this gray area, There's always been all this speculation about their reserves, but now the spotlight is really on them.
Yeah, and these sources, they paint a pretty fascinating picture, but it's also a little unsettling, right? We got these reports about a DOJ investigation into potential bank fraud. And then there's this whole debate about their attestations versus actual audits. What's the deal with that anyway?
So Tether claims that they have all these reserves backing every single USDT token, mostly in U.S. Treasury bills, but they've never really been open to having a full independent audit. Instead, they offer these attestations, which basically just give you a snapshot of their assets at a specific time.
So it's like peeking into someone's bank account for just a second and then assuming that they're totally loaded based on that one quick glance.
Exactly. It doesn't give you the full picture, and that's a big concern when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars. It's like building a house on a foundation that you can't fully inspect. You might be fine for a while, but there's always that doubt lingering in the back of your mind.
And that doubt seems to be growing, especially with this DOJ investigation looming overhead. Some of these articles, especially that one from CoinGeek, dive into some pretty serious accusations. They're talking about money laundering, connections to some shady banking practices, even allegations of facilitating terrorism.
Yeah, it's important to remember, though, that those are just allegations at this point. And Tether has denied any wrongdoing pretty forcefully. But the fact that they're facing this level of scrutiny from a major regulatory body like the DOJ, that's a big deal. That's definitely a cause for concern.
It definitely adds a whole other layer to this whole Tether saga, right? And then on top of that, you've got the EU's new crypto regulations, MiCA, kind of adding fuel to the fire. Now, the nitty-gritty details of MiCA might seem a world away for some people, but it feels like those ripples are definitely reaching Tether's shores.
Oh, absolutely. MiCA's pushing for much stricter rules for stablecoins, particularly those they classify as significant. And that basically means stablecoins that meet certain thresholds for market cap, their user base, and transaction volume. They're demanding more transparency, more robust reserve requirements, something Tether has historically been pretty reluctant to embrace.
And that reluctance seems to be causing some real-world problems for them. We're seeing reports of major exchanges like Bitstamp and OKX delisting or restricting Tether pairs. Even Binance's CEO, Changpeng Zhao, he's been out there praising Circle, USDC, while kind of throwing shade at Tether.
Right. And these delistings, they're not just symbolic. They have real consequences for Tether. It impacts their liquidity, it limits their reach, and ultimately it really erodes trust. When big players in the industry start distancing themselves like that, it sends a pretty clear signal that something's not quite right.
And that brings us back to this central question of trust, or maybe more accurately, the lack of it. I think it was Cointelegraph that mentioned this detail, and it's a pretty striking one. In Tether's own terms of service, it says they can actually refuse redemptions for any reason. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely it is. It basically means that users are putting a huge amount of faith in Tether. Yeah. They're trusting that the company will always honor its commitment to that peg, but there's really no guarantee.
So it's almost like just handing over your money and saying, hey, I believe in you, please don't let me down. But what happens if that belief starts to crumble?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and it's one that has a lot of people on edge. To really understand the potential consequences here, we need to take a closer look at Tether's history, their banking relationships, and how they actually managed to maintain that crucial $1 peg. It's really kind of wild how Tether's become this cornerstone of the crypto market, even with this constant cloud of uncertainty hanging over it.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, right? It's like this giant elephant in the room that everyone's been tiptoeing around for years. But now it feels like the elephant's getting a little restless, and people are starting to notice.
And I think a lot of that restlessness comes from Tether's history with traditional banks. Mm-hmm. It's been complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of these sources talk about that. It seems like they've bounced around from bank to bank, even from country to country, always facing pushback, always under scrutiny. Why has it been so hard for them to find a stable banking partner?
Well, banks are all about managing risk, right? And Tether, with their lack of transparency and their history of regulatory issues, it's a big red flag for a lot of these institutions. They've been accused of, well, of not being entirely honest about the nature of their transactions. And there are even whispers about potential involvement in, well, in activities that banks just don't want to touch.
So it's like a catch-22, right? They need reliable banking to manage their reserves and maintain that peg. But their lack of transparency makes banks hesitant to work with them.
Exactly. And this whole situation has fueled so much speculation about what Tether's reserves actually look like. If they're having trouble with banks, it makes you wonder, can they actually access those assets if, let's say, a lot of users suddenly want to redeem their USDT?
Which brings us to this DOJ investigation. It's not just about some potential banking issues. This is about the integrity of the entire Tether system.
Yeah, the DOJ is reportedly looking into whether Tether executives misled banks about their business, potentially committing bank fraud. If these allegations turn out to be true, the consequences could be pretty serious.
We're talking big fines, limitations on their operations, maybe even criminal charges. That CoinGeek article really lays out the potential fallout.
And it's not just Tether that could be affected. The whole crypto market relies on stablecoins, and Tether is, well, it's the king. If Tether were to collapse, it could set off a chain reaction. It would hit exchanges, DeFi protocols, even individual investors.
It's like imagining a Jenga tower.
Yeah.
And Tether is that bottom block that's holding everything up. You pull that out, and the whole thing comes crashing down.
Yeah, it's a dramatic analogy, but it does capture that sense of unease in the crypto community right now.
So what are the possibilities here? What happens if the DOJ finds enough evidence to go after Tether? Do they get shut down completely?
It's hard to say for sure. They could go for a settlement like Tether did with the New York Attorney General a while back. You know, admit to some violations, pay a fine, agree to some reforms.
But that was before MiCA, right? And those EU regulations, they seem pretty serious. They're not just going to let Tether off easy anymore.
That's true. MiCA represents a big shift towards more regulation in the crypto space. They're demanding transparency and accountability that Tether hasn't really shown so far. That could make any kind of settlement with the DOJ a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive.
So even if they manage to get through this DOJ investigation, the pressure from regulators, it's not going away.
Not at all. And that pressure is only going to increase as more countries follow the EU's lead and implement their own stablecoin regulations. Tether's days of operating in the shadows, they're numbered. They're going to have to adapt and adapt quickly if they want to stay on top.
So what would adapting even look like for Tether? Can they actually change their image and embrace this new era of transparency?
That is the billion-dollar question. It would require a complete transformation of their operations. They'd have to agree to a full independent audit from a reputable firm, open their books, show everyone what they're working with, prove that their reserves are actually backed by real assets.
And they'd have to be more open about their banking relationships, their transactions, basically their whole business model.
Absolutely. And that level of transparency, that would be a huge change for them. It would expose them to a level of scrutiny they've never had to deal with before.
But it could also be the thing that saves them, right? It could be how they regain trust, satisfy regulators, and secure their place in the future of crypto.
It's a gamble either way. If they choose transparency, they risk showing their weaknesses and losing control. But if they stick to their old ways, they risk being overtaken by all these new regulations.
This whole deep dive has been like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You know something bad is about to happen, but you just can't look away. And the crazy thing is, the fate of Tether, it could actually decide the future of stablecoins as a whole.
It's true. Tether's dominance has had such a huge impact on the stablecoin market. If they were to fail, it could shake confidence in the whole idea of stablecoins, and that would be a major blow to the adoption of crypto.
I mean, it really feels like Tether's at a crossroads here. On one hand, they've got this huge user base. They're deeply embedded in the whole crypto world, and they've been playing by their own rules and winning for a long time. But on the other hand, there's this mounting pressure from regulators, that erosion of trust, and this DOJ investigation hanging over them that could just bring the whole thing crashing down.
It's like watching this clash between the old way of doing things in crypto and this new wave of regulations that's coming in, and the outcome of this fight. It's going to have huge impact on the entire industry.
Okay, so let's play this out for a second. Let's say Tether decides to just try and tough it out. They fight the DOJ. They resist all these calls for transparency. What happens then?
Well, it would be a huge risk. The DOJ, they have a lot of power. And if they find any evidence of wrongdoing, Tether could face some massive fines, restrictions on what they can do. They could lose even more trust, and that could be, well, that could be the end for them.
And even if they somehow manage to dodge the DOJ, they're still facing this whole shift towards regulation. MiCA is just the start, right? More and more countries are going to start demanding more transparency from stablecoin issuers.
Right. They could end up being isolated, operating in fewer and fewer places. And that would make it much harder for them to maintain that liquidity, that stability that's been so important to their success.
Okay, so let's flip it around. What if Tether decides to actually embrace transparency? What would that even look like?
Well, they'd have to completely change how they operate. They'd need a full independent audit from a really reputable firm. They'd have to open up their books, show everyone what they have, prove that their reserves are actually backed by real assets.
And they'd have to be more open about their banking relationships, their transactions, basically everything they do.
Exactly. And that kind of transparency, it would be a huge departure from how they've always done things. It would open them up to a level of scrutiny they've never dealt with before.
Like it'd also be what saves them, right? It could be how they regain trust, how they satisfy regulators, how they secure their place in this new crypto landscape.
It's a gamble either way. If they go for transparency, they risk revealing their weaknesses and losing control. But if they stick to their old ways, they risk being swept away by this tide of regulation.
This whole deep dive has been, I don't know, it's been like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You know something bad is going to happen, but you can't tear your eyes away. And the thing is, the fate of Tether, it might actually decide the future of stablecoins in general.
Yeah, that's true. Tether's had such a huge influence on the stablecoin market. If they were to collapse, it could really shake confidence in the whole idea of stablecoins. And that would be a big step backward for crypto.
So what's the main takeaway for our listeners today? What should they be thinking about as they, try to navigate all of this?
I think the big thing is don't assume stability is a given. Do your research, understand the risks, and think about spreading your holdings across different stablecoins.
And keep an eye on the news. This story is far from over. The choices Tether makes in the next few months, they're going to have a ripple effect on the whole crypto world.
It's a good reminder that crypto is still, in a lot of ways, like the Wild West. There's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of risk.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us all a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us as we explored, the somewhat murky world of Tether and this potential crypto earthquake.
Always a pleasure. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there in the world of crypto.